can tell me what the 3 key economic ideas are we talked about last week? First one was people are what? Who remembers? Rational. Yes. What does that mean exactly if you're rational? A rational person. What did we say that meant in terms of economic decision making? You can look it up if you don't know it. Use reasoning to make your decisions, right? So we're going to weigh our costs and our benefits before we decide something, right? Excellent. That was the first one. So we just assume the people we're talking about are rational people. What is the second one? Do you remember what the second one was? If you don't remember, look it up. I don't expect you to memorize everything. People respond to incentives, right? Now, we tend to think of incentives as monetary, but do they all have to be monetary? Not necessarily, right? People respond to economic incentives. What was the third one?
Optimal decisions are made at the margin.
Yep, optimal decisions are made at the margin. And they were, again, applying that cost-benefit analysis there. And so we're looking at, making sure that the benefit we get or derive from some activity is going to outweigh the cost of that activity, right? Excellent. Now, what were the 3 economic questions that we have to answer? What are the 3 economic questions that we talked about we have to answer? Who remembers what those are? We have problems in our society, and the problems are due to scarcity. So what are the economic questions associated with that? Okay. What goods and services will be produced? And we're going to probably talk at length about that, what goods and services are going to be produced. We even talked a little bit about it last week, like how do producers and manufacturers know what people want, right? You guys gave some good examples. What was the second one? How? Yeah, how are they going to be produced? And now we have, technology plays a really important role in how those goods are produced. And what was the third one? Who? Yeah, who's going to get the goods and services? And we said basically that there were 2 things that had to be present. I mean, we want a lot of things, right? But that doesn't mean we have the means to obtain those things that we want, right? So we have to be willing, that's the wanting part, and able, that's the have money, right, to buy. So most of the times, the people that receive the goods and services are people that can afford to do so, right? So, and we'll branch off from that a lot and talk a little bit more about that as we progress. But I think we talked a little bit about the types of economies here. We mentioned centrally planned, and I think somebody did identify that North Korea is right now the only country with a completely centrally planned economy. And we said that, a market economy, we like to think the United States represents a market economy, one where, the decisions of households and firms. And when we say households and firms, that's just another way of saying buyers and sellers, producers and consumers. So think of yourselves as the household if you're the consumer or the buyer. Think of yourself as the firm if you're the producer of something or the seller of something. I mean, you can be in both roles, right? You just have to be able to identify which role you're in when you're examining these things. We're more of a mixed economy, though, because in a mixed economy, we mainly operate as a market economy, but the government does intervene in some cases. I think we mentioned last week one example was minimum wage, right? Minimum wage is what we call a floor. The lowest you could pay somebody, right, is minimum wage. If you're a business and you fall under certain criteria. And that's a federal law, right? So you have to follow the law, and that's an example of government intervention. So we're not 100% market economy. So some would argue that the United States is more of a mixed economy, which I would agree with. We're going to talk more about that government intervention in a variety of different chapters and different topics. So, how do when we talk about economics or economies? We're talking about trying to be efficient. And there's 2 types of, efficiencies that are promoted by market economies. We have something called productive efficiency, and that's where goods and services are going to be produced at the lowest cost possible. If I was the producer or manufacturer of something, why would I want to produce whatever it is that I'm selling or provide the service, whatever it is, at the lowest cost possible? Why would I want to do that? To maximize my margin or my profit margin, right? That's exactly what she's talking about. I want to make money. So I'm going to charge a fee or, I'm going to charge a fee to my customer I have expenses, though, associated with providing that service or that product, right? And so the only way to maximize my bottom line is to either raise my revenues, which my customers probably won't like, right? Or lower my expenses. And so I want to provide my product at the lowest cost to me possible. Bless you. Allocative efficiency is where we are producing goods that customers or consumers want, okay? We're producing goods that customers or consumers want. The best kind of goods are the ones that you don't even know you want till you go to the store and you see it on the shelf. And then you're like, oh, yay, I want that, right? I didn't even know I wanted that. That's obviously intentional. That's psychology. And so we're going to sort of, just keep those in mind. Again, this chapter is pretty term heavy, and we want to make sure we understand all the terms before we move forward. We talked the other day when you guys were doing your little activity with your candy. I said it had to be voluntary, right? You're not stealing candy from someone. You're not threatening people and saying, if you don't give me that Twix bar, this is going to happen to you. No, it has to be voluntary. And the same goes in a market system. So buyers and sellers are voluntarily exchanging their products and services, right? And these are sort of assumptions we make, but it's also good to note them as well. Some of the things, and we talked about these already, we might not immediately do things in the most efficient way. I'm sure you could give me examples of, a learning process that you went through, right, before you mastered whatever it is you were trying to do. And you learned how to, do that one thing in the most efficient way possible. And there's always like people out there that say, you want to save some time, here, do this way, or let me show you how I can save you time, doing this, like cleaning and laundry and all those things, right? We have all kinds of fancy products now and machines and technology that allow us to do things much more efficiently, like washing clothes, for example. Has anybody ever seen one of those washing machines with the rollers? Anybody? I think you guys are really young, so my grandmother used to have one of those washing machines, and you had to actually stick an article of clothing through these two rollers and to squeeze out the water, because you didn't plug this thing in, it didn't have a spin cycle. You guys are all looking at me like you have no idea what I'm talking about. Yes, I remember that, unfortunately. Did we have dryers back in the early days? How did people dry their clothes? Some people still hang them outside, right? But yeah, there was no such thing as a dryer. So, the convenience of real quick washing something and throwing it in the dryer. But that's an example of products or technologies that have allowed, us to do things a lot more efficiently, right? Cutting the grass. Have any of you ever used anything but a lawnmower that you put gasoline or was plugged into something, or a riding mower? You ever use a regular old-fashioned push mower that doesn't have a motor or anything? Oh yeah. So yeah, this is all, it's all you. It doesn't, these nice mowers now, you just you let go and it's kind of rolling on its own and really don't have to do too much. But I mean, obviously we've developed, right, over time, and most of the reasons for that is to make our lives a lot easier, to be more efficient. Okay. But it doesn't always work out that way at the beginning. Trial and error, a lot of trial and error. Governments sometimes interfere with the outcomes that buyers and sellers intend with their policies and their legislation. Sometimes we have things that we can't control. Pollution, for example, we don't realize how much sometimes that affects this market economy that we're talking about. So you're going to see examples of that as well. The thing about efficient outcomes is sometimes the outcome itself is not always desirable because we don't perceive it to be fair. So it's important to understand in economics the difference between equity, and we'll get to the next screen, but let's talk about equity first. So the fair distribution of economic benefits. In other words, does everyone receive the same amount of economic benefits? Do we all receive the same amount of economic benefits? Everybody in this room, think it's equal between all of us? Probably not, right? And we could talk about reasons why it may or may not be, right? The other thing is your perception. What is your perception of fair? That's kind of difficult. And we may have different perceptions of what is fair based on the way we were raised, right? And maybe the experiences that we've had. And so governments sometimes try to determine what is equitable and what is fair, and that's not always easy to do. And so if you're eligible to receive some sort of benefits from a policy or a legislation, that's perhaps the government's way of trying to distribute some of that equity to make it more fair, right? So it's tough. We talk about taxes, and people say, well, these taxes, they're not fair because the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. You've probably heard that statement. Now, it's certainly a blanket statement, and that's not necessarily my personal opinion, but these are the things that we talk about though when we're talking about what's fair and equitable in terms of economic systems. We're going to take a look at, and I know I mentioned this already, we're going to take a look at economic models. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but we're going to be looking at some graphs, and I'll show you those a little bit later. I'm not going to have you graph. I'm not going to pay too much attention to the details. I want you to think of a graph as a picture that just tells a story, that makes a concept easier for us to understand. That's all. Okay? We're going to be analyzing human behavior, as I said before, because we're trying to figure out why people make the decisions that they make, right? So we talk about human behavior, we got to also consider two things, something called positive analysis, something called normative analysis. And I'll give you some examples when we get to talking about having a discussion about some of these questions we're going to look at, but positive analysis is analysis that is concerned with what is, or think of it this way, facts. What are the facts, right? We can disagree with the facts. We can like the facts, not like the facts, but that doesn't change the fact that they're the facts, right? So it's what it is, right? Do you ever hear that phrase? Do you ever hear anybody say, it is what it is? I say that a lot of times. Like, it is what it is, right? What does that mean? It is what it is. Yeah, you can't change it, right? So I guess I'll just have to accept it. I might not like it, right? But I'm going to accept it. And normative analysis is concerned with what ought to be. Okay, what ought to be, what you would like it to be. Best case scenario kind of analysis. So we'll look at that a little later, and I promise the examples will help to maybe make that. Oh, and economists mostly perform positive analysis. They're concerned with facts. Okay. And in your book, periodically, you get these little making the connections, they're called. So the idea is to try to take the concepts that we're learning in Econ 101 and connect them to some current idea, something that you might be able to relate to as a student, okay? And this one, and we'll come back to this one, but there's a little blurb in the chapter about the idea that medical school should be free. Now, any of you have parents, relatives, siblings, whatever, friends who went to medical school, going to medical school, anybody? Okay, super cheap, right? No, it's not super cheap, right? It's extremely expensive. But the idea is that, you go to medical school, you spend all this money, and then you come out in the end and you have this wonderful job where you're making hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay back all the student loans that you have, right, for medical school. You guys know PA program here at St. Francis, right? The physician assistant program. I know people that have a degree, have a PA degree, not necessarily just from here or anywhere. I mean, the costs are pretty comparable among schools now, otherwise we could be competitive. And the average PA student graduates with about $130,000 or $140,000 worth of debt. The average physical therapy student graduates with about as much of that. And when that translates into a student loan payment, you're looking at like $1,200 a month student loan payment. So what kind of salary do you have to make, right, in order to support that payment? Because that's just one bill you have. You probably would like to have a car, right, to get to that job. And you probably would like to have a place to live too. So, it's, when you're weighing the costs and benefits of something like that, when somebody comes along with an idea like this, people listen, right? Shortage of doctors. That's what they're prescribing. Economists say there's going to be a shortage of doctors. So now you should all run out and change your majors, right? And all become doctors. I'd make a horrible doctor, I promise you. Anyway, it says there's forecasts that indicate a significant shortage of doctors, especially primary care physicians. You might know them as your PCPs, right? People you go to when you're not feeling well, when you need a checkup, something like that, by 2020. And there are a lot of reasons why there may be a shortage. The cost of education is one of them. Insurance cost, though, is another one that's sort of driving that too. But anyway, the high cost of medical school may prevent some people from becoming doctors, lead people to pursue lucrative specialties instead of primary care. So a lucrative specialty would be something like a skin doctor, right? A dermatologist. That's considered actually a more lucrative track to, being just a PCP, all right? So, you're performing some kind of, surgeries on people who want to look better. Obviously, most of that is not covered from by insurance, right? And so, you can charge more for those things. And so usually you make more money if you're a plastic surgeon than you do if you're a PCP, right? So certain areas of specialties, people may be choosing that as opposed to being just a general practitioner. So would more people become primary care physicians if medical school were free? And if so, would it be worth the cost? So later on, you guys, somebody in this room, one group, is going to get the opportunity to answer that question, to analyze that question. And those are the kind of things we're going to do in class after we get through the material. We're going to give questions to different groups, and then we're going to talk about. We're going to have a sharing time where you talk about your answers to those questions. And lastly, in this chapter, again, just a few terms. This is intro to macroeconomics. This course. If you take Econ 102, which you're not required to take if you're not a business major. If you're a business major, you'll take Econ 102. In Econ 102, we study microeconomics. So, bless you. So think of the terms macro meaning bigger or larger, micro meaning a smaller unit. So in microeconomics, we study households and firms, individual units, okay? As opposed to the economy as a whole, which is really what we're here to study in macro. We're looking at how choices and decisions affect the entire economy, not just individual units of the economy. So in microeconomics, we just focus a little bit more, take the same concepts pretty much, but we focus more on individual units and how they interact with markets. Here, macroeconomics, the study of the economy as a whole. So we're going to talk about things like inflation and unemployment a little bit later on. And these are just some examples. I'm going to skip over that. And just, again, finally, some more terms, and then we're done with these PowerPoints here. Again, I said this chapter is very term heavy. Certain jargon or words that we use in different contexts when we're talking about economics, So we have a term like technology. Now you and I, we say technology. We all have a pretty general understanding of what that means. And for the most part, it means the same thing here in economics. Technology is represents the processes a firm uses to produce goods and services. And we'll talk about a variety of different kinds of technology. Capital, very different meaning than accounting. And when we're talking about capital in accounting, we're talking about money, cash, right? In economics, we talk about capital, we're talking about manufactured goods that are used to produce other goods and services. So equipment and machinery that you might use to make your product or provide your service. So we want to make sure we understand. We're going to really focus on the differences between economic terminology and accounting terminology because there are differences between the two, so we want to make sure we understand those differences. All right, so I'm going to pause there, and we're going to take a look at how many of you have a book with you right now. Don't be afraid to raise your hands. Okay. All right. So, all right. Well, that's good because we can move around the room a little bit. This gets you up and motivated, right? Maybe up, not necessarily motivated, right? All right, so what I want to do is I'm just going to kind of cover some of these. I want to talk about the problems that are in the end of this chapter. So I don't get to pick this book, but that doesn't mean I dislike it or anything like that. But when I ask you to buy a book, I want to make sure we're using that book because nothing worse than a professor that says buy a book and then they don't use it all semester and you're like, hey, I paid X number of dollars for this book, right? And by the way, this book has some pretty good problems and applications in it anyway. So as you're preparing, as we're going through the material and you're already thinking about test preparation, I'm sure, at the end of every chapter, I say that, at the end of every chapter, just so you guys can see, for those of you who don't have a book, there's a chapter summary and problems that are separated or set up by section, okay? So the key terms are going to be the first thing that you see. And again, I'm not asking you to memorize things here, but you really should be able to define those key terms, especially in these early chapters where the terminology, is new to you. And then we have the first section, 3 key economic ideas, which you guys quickly gave me at the beginning of class. Here's just a brief summary of that section, okay, paragraph or 2, depending. There are review questions that you'll see first, and there's never more than a handful of those either. If you can answer those review questions, then you can say to yourself, I understood the content in that section. And then we have problems and applications, which is what I'm interested in. So that other stuff is really, depending on how well you want to perform on a test, you might take a look at those other things. But I'm more interested in some of these problems and applications. So for example, let's take a look at one together, and then we'll I'm going to try to parry off here and have a few of you work on some of these other problems. So if you don't have a book, your punishment, that's terrible. I'm going to ask you to find somebody that does to work with them, and if it's not somebody you know, that's okay. We're all friends in here, right? Okay, so this first one deals with that first section of the chapter. Notice, because it starts out with 1.4. Like if we were in section 2 of chapter 1, it would say 2.1, 2.2. So we're broken down by different subject matter in the chapter. So this one says, according to the FBI bank crime statistics. So the FBI maintains statistics on a lot of different industries. Okay, one of them is bank crimes. So people robbing banks. All right. There were nearly 4,000 bank robberies in the United States in 2014. Does that sound like a lot? To you? I actually don't know how many banks there are in the United States. That would be something we would need to know to determine if 4,000 bank robberies is a lot. But in the entire United States, 50 states, right? I don't think that's a lot, to be honest with you. I don't know how many banks there are. There are a lot of banks, though. Okay?
Yeah, I don't know if there are 4,000 banks in New Jersey.
Well, I'm talking about in the U.S., so.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go on. It says the FBI claims that banks have made themselves easy targets for bank robbers, all right, by refusing to install clear acrylic partitions called banded barriers that separate bank tellers from the public. All right, so like a clear glass partition, all right? According to a special agent with the FBI, banded barriers are a great deterrent. We've talked to guys who rob banks, and as soon as they see a banded barrier, they go find another bank. Now this is not made up. This is actually true. This is not made up. Okay? Despite this finding, many banks have been reluctant to install these barriers. This goes on to the top, but my book doesn't want to stay flat there, so I have to play around here a little bit. Okay? So it says, wouldn't banks have a strong incentive to install banded barriers to deter robberies? Why then do so many banks not do so? So we talked about trade-offs and opportunity costs last week. Do you guys remember that? So before we answer this question, who can tell me what a trade-off is? We said, we face scarcity. What does that mean first? We live in a world of scarcity. What do you say that meant? Yeah, we have a limited number of resources. Can we have everything we want? No, we can't. Okay, we have a limited number of resources. And so we make decisions, right, where we select one thing over another, and we call that a trade-off, right? And so then we said, what about an opportunity cost? Well, I said the opportunity cost of you coming to St. Francis and being a full-time student, for those of you who are, you probably gave up the opportunity to have a full-time job, right? But you did that because you hoped that with your degree, you would make more money, right, after you graduate and get a job than you would had you just gotten a job right out of high school, okay? So let's think about this. These banded barriers, do they mention anything about cost in here? So it's pretty easy for the FBI to say, okay, we did this research. This would deter, right, all these bank robberies. But what do you think the perspective of the bank is? Any ideas? Why would the bank not be inclined to install banded barriers? Okay, it could be very expensive, yes, and what? There's another part to that. Okay, yeah, that's like, yeah, I actually was trying to order a new door, and somebody said, the guy that came, he said, well, we have these doors with bars on them, and I thought, I'm not sure that the people in my neighborhood would like me to have bars on my doors. I don't know, I don't know what kind of message that might send, right? So what kind of message might a banded barrier send to people? Shouldn't be at this bank, it's dangerous, right? They must get robbed all the time. I mean, isn't that, that could be a perception someone has. I'm not saying it is or isn't. I don't know that I'd think anything of it, walking into a bank and seeing that. But what else? So you're worried about your customers and what they might think, but what else? It says 4,000 banks were robbed, and we don't know. Somebody Google real quick. How many banks are there in the United States? Just real quick. You can get your phone out and do it. How many banks are there in the U.S.? Because if only 4,000 are getting robbed, are the majority of banks being robbed? Are the majority of banks being robbed? No. So if your bank hasn't been robbed in the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, are you going to go spend a boatload of money installing these bandit barriers? No. Why not? Because the opportunity cost of doing so, right, is actually greater than if you don't. So, trade-offs, right? Opportunity cost. Anybody have an answer for me? 6,800? That's it? Really? Okay. 6,800 banks. Anybody have a different number?
I found that Wells Fargo alone has 6,300.
Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, it's got to be in the 20,000.
Bank of America and JP Morgan have over 5,000 each.
Yeah. So okay. So all right. So what are you looking at? Where's the FDIC? Oh, FDIC insured. Okay. You're all right. That's good. So the reason that no, you're okay. You're all right. So FDI insured means that the bank is insured if if there is like the Great Depression, if there's a bank run, and everybody runs to the bank and takes out all their money. Some banks have insurance to protect you up to a certain amount so that you don't lose your money. But Wells Fargo, and what was the other one you mentioned? Bank of America. Some of those are not federally protected. So, yeah, but you can still walk into certain locations and withdraw money. They act as a bank. They just might not be insured. So if we combine the amount of federally insured banks and the amount of banks that are not federally insured, the number is very large. The point being is that that's 4,000. That's not a whole lot of banks getting robbed. And in your textbook on page 5, there's a comment about this. And the reason I want to mention the comment is this. Where is that now? Oh, the average loss in a bank robbery is about $1,200. Is $1,200 a lot of money? Probably not if you're comparing it to the cost of installing these bandit barriers, right? Unfortunately, folks, it's probably not like you see in the movies, where they get to take bundles of money out of the safe and everybody empties their drawers and they leave with, bazillion dollars in their car. That's probably not how it usually happens. So that's just one example of one of the things we learn about in chapter 1 and how does that apply to everyday life. How do regular, normal businesses use these ideas to make decisions? Okay, so that was just one example. Get the gist? Okay. Let's take a look here. We had kind of already talked about this one. I highlight things and I look at questions and I think, which one would be good for us? All right, so this next one, still relating to that first section where we talked about people respond to incentives and things like that. This one says, there's another making the connection. It's on page 5 as well. It says, many universities and corporations offer a health and wellness program that helps their employees improve or maintain their health and get paid. Now, it's a relatively small amount, but who doesn't want to get paid, right? For doing so. The programs vary, but typically consist of employees completing a health assessment, receiving a program for healthy living, and monitoring their monthly health activities. All right, so sometimes here at the university, we get emails from like the physical therapy students, the exercise phys students, and they want to use us as their guinea pigs. And I always think, oh, I would love to do something like that. And then I think about this person having to take my measurements and weigh me, and then I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. So, that's a little bit of a deterrent. But I know a lot of people around here, they do participate because if you're enrolled in the health insurance program here at the university, there are some monetary incentives for doing so. I'm not enrolled. I don't have the health care here. I'm on my husband's health care, so I don't really have that incentive. So to me, it's just, I'm a little just the squeamish part of me, overrides this whatever benefit I might get out of participating in this program because I'm not really getting a monetary benefit. So, having students, take my measurements, not something that I'm going to do, and, when there's little incentive for me to do so. Okay, anyway, why would universities and corporations pay employees to improve or maintain their health? How does health insurance affect the incentive of employees to improve or maintain their health? Would a wellness program increase or decrease the health insurance premiums that an insurance company would charge the university? We talked a little bit about this last week. Anybody remember some of the things we talked about?
Yeah, like the older the university or corporations, employee population is, the higher the premium.
Correct.
The more unhealthy they are, the higher the premium.
Right, and one of the things, if we have a relatively older population as our employees, I can't change that, can I? Like, I can't make people younger. And I certainly can't, there are laws that protect people that are over a certain age. It's called age discrimination. Does anybody know what the age is? It's very depressing to me, actually. Does anybody know what the age is? Age discrimination protects people over the age of, yep, 40. So now, don't be going around saying if you're 40, you're old, okay? I'm way over 40, but still I don't like to think of it. When I was young, and I remember I used to think when 30 was old, then I used to think 40 was old, then I used to think 50 was old. I'm not really sure where I'm at now, but it's all relative, I guess. What other things did we talk about? So the average age of your employees is going to definitely affect your insurance premiums. So maybe as the employer, I have to find some other ways of reducing costs, right? And so if I offer this incentive plan and people participate, do you think that would lower my insurance premiums? If I could prove that it actually improved the health of my employees, yeah, it could lower my insurance premiums, right? Could lower my insurance premiums. Why is that important to the employee? So if you go home and ask your parents, hey, do you have a health insurance plan? Maybe you already know the answer to that. And they say yes, but I pay for some of that plan. What does that mean? That means that even though their employer is paying a part of the premium for their health insurance, they're paying a portion too. So, here at the university, employers have to contribute to those premiums. So every month, an amount of money comes out of their paycheck. What happens when the university insurance premiums go up? Who does that get passed along to? The employees, right? So if you had some sort of incentive, bless you, to lower those premiums, would you take advantage of it? By participating in some kind of program that just required you to, check in once a week, try to eat a little healthier, right? Maybe lose 5 or 10 pounds, if it affected your pocket, is that enough of an incentive for you? Probably, right? Especially if you're working, you probably are supporting yourself, maybe you're supporting a family, you were on a budget, you're going to want to try to lower those premiums. I talk to lots of people that say, my monthly insurance premiums are ridiculous. And they barely can afford them. So, this would be, obviously a wellness program would definitely decrease the insurance premiums, and that would get passed along to employees as well, okay? So in other words, are you responding? Do people respond? People respond to economic incentives. The economic incentive here is a lower insurance premium, that's all, okay? Trying to find different ways of applying some of these concepts. All right. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is maybe get in groups of like 4 or 5. That's not a lot of groups. That should be enough groups that each group at least has a book, okay? So, if you have more than one person in a group that has a book, that's fine. Just try to, and if you don't know each other, say hello. I know you met some people when we did the candy trade. But I just want you to get in groups of 4 or 5, all right? And I'm gonna each assign a group a question. And I'm only going to give you like 5 minutes to kind of evaluate the question, and then I want you to pick one spokesperson who will speak for the group and talk about how you guys answered or the conclusion you came to that question. Sound good? All right. So, I can certainly have you guys count off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but I would prefer that you just look around, see who's around you, get in a group. I know I didn't see a lot of hands over here. You've got the book in that corner, so I think you're going to be Miss Popular right now. So. Be nice to her. Those of you sitting around her, be nice, because she's the only one with a book in that back corner. You can move around the room. Get up and move if you see somebody you know across the aisle. Go sit with them. And then once you get in your groups, I'll give you a question to answer, but you got to get in a group so I can see who you are.
Are we allowed to have 6?
Sure.
Thank you. It's a little under the figure. Yeah.
Okay, I have one for you guys I like here. So page 25, number 3.9. Okay, you may have to go look at the little article in the book, all right? Chapter opener. We didn't read it out loud to each other, so you guys are gonna have to look at that. So you guys are 3.9. You guys over here in the 3, who's the group here? Is you 3? Okay. So you are going to look at for me. Actually, one question that's not in here. It's not in this book, okay? You guys know who LeBron James is? Should LeBron James have done the college? Why or why not? All right. You don't have to, if you have to look at this, you have to do a little research, that's fine. I need that question. You guys ready? On page 23, 1.9. Right? 24, 2.7. One question, just 1.7. Okay. All right.
No, I know that. Just like the same day.
I'm using the new one.
So I think like
Okay. I'll give you the PowerPoint somehow. As long as you. Oh, I thought
Like, I know like a lot of athletes like start restaurants or something, and I think Breeze did in Milano, and like they just like find someone to like run the place. I don't think they'll run the
2.6 is the same as mine. All right, that's the
I have to know. I really mind for the student athlete.
Like, I hope if you're. Does depend on like.
Did I give anyone 3.8? I did, I gave you guys 3.8. I'm trying to make sure that I think that all.
I have to read it.
So if this means you have to look up something in the book, look it up. If you think that Google could help you, Google it. But I want an answer that's going to sound like, you know, related to the material that we've been discussing. I kind of threw a wrench in your guys, So there are lots of videos out there about like what happened in the course of action with a different. It's kind of interesting. It's not really just about sports. We can look at a lot of sports figures and things that happen in sports world. Stuff we discuss. For a lot of people, that makes it a little more interesting. I am a LeBron fan. I'm a little upset about the Lakers, so I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can cheer for the Lakers. I'm disappointed. But I understand it's a business decision. So I can appreciate that.
Like you could be breakfast and things, and they are not showing you that. I mean, you go on us for a right? And I mean, you go there and everybody is going to see all the
So this spokesperson is just gonna give you answers, not necessarily your personal opinion, just share it. And then the next time you get your group, somebody else will do So next time you guys are in these groups, if you like your group and you want to stick with your group, that's fine, but you have to pick a new spokesperson. You can't make the same. You gotta take turns, right?
Somebody else has
That's a really good idea.
I just want to see lids, yeah. What I'm thinking is, yeah, I don't remember the name of the thing, but they're, maybe they're, that one thing, other thing, lower prices, so they can sell more.
You got
So
2 or
then
3 more
I-
minutes. If you
not
want to jot
I
things
guess
down so you know what to say when I say,
maybe
it's your turn, what you have to say, go right ahead.
I like football, but like basketball.
I don't remember.
Or you could say, well, in practice,
They
know that it's famous.
Yeah.
Like if I don't show up to a break, I'm showing somebody who is somewhere where they serve something.
Yeah, but maybe they're, because maybe there's a guy that doesn't have the money to buy a hamburger, but he can buy it.
How you guys doing over here? You all right? Good. Okay. You have a spokesperson?
If I drop out of college, yeah, so they definitely.
Does anyone need more time? Anyone need more time? Okay, that's okay. Wait a couple minutes. It's not about right or wrong. No, they say something you didn't think of.
Oh,
You know?
just the two.
It's not 100% right or wrong. There are like choices, hundreds, that's kind of what this class is all about. But then you have to be, aware that if you pick this choice, then these things happen, right? And these other things can happen. You know what I mean? Just mentioned trade-offs, right? There are trade-offs. You just want to make sure that you're identifying all those so that you make the best decision. The decision that you think is best for your organization, your business, whatever. You guys okay now? We good? All right. So I need everybody to listen up. So when other groups are talking, so I kind of have a pet peeve, and that's when, once somebody's talking and other people are not listening and talking to someone else or on their phones under their tables, as I've already seen today. Remember, I can see that. So please be courteous to your classmates and listen to what they have to say, all right? Listen to what they have to say. I'm going to start with this group here. Which question did you guys have? Because I'm not going to remember.
3.9.
3.9. So I'm going to put it up here. I'm going to read it, and then they're going to share their answer. And then the rest of you, feel free if you have something you want to say or add, please feel free. There's no right or wrong here, right? We're identifying choices, consequences, options, things like that. All right, so this is related to the chapter 1 opener, which we did not read as a group. Sometimes I read those, sometimes I don't. We didn't read this one. Or maybe, I don't think we did. No, I don't think we did. An article in the Wall Street Journal discussing Xanadu's prospects for successfully selling its home medical devices observes another challenge will be getting doctors on board with the idea of patients bringing them information from home. What economic incentives do doctors have to accept this information? What economic incentives do they not have? So can you guys just give us a brief background on what that article was about? I know I'm putting you on the spot with that one, but.
So this person came up with a device that was able to read your vital signs.
Uh-huh.
So instead of going to the doctor and getting tested for them,
Right.
you could just do it at home.
So did you hear that? There's a device out there that you can test your own vitals, like blood pressure, things like that, and send them off to your doctor as opposed to going to the doctor. Now, you guys, how many of you would do that? How many of you would just use a device to take all your vitals and then send it off to your doctor and then have him treat you via the telephone, whatever, FaceTime? Okay, so some of you would. How many of you would never do something like that? Okay, and you might have your own personal reasons. I don't know what they are. We don't have time for that. But obviously it's become an option, right? Okay, so what do you think the incentives are for the doctors to accept the information that is provided, right, by the patient taking his or her own vitals, and what do you think are not the incentives? They don't. What incentives do they have to not accept it?
The positive incentives, like make them accept it, would be like they would lessen the doctor's workload.
Okay.
And the
Sure.
negative ones, like make them decline it, is that like doctors will be making money from the testing and the technology may not be as reliable as being tested.
Okay. So yeah, I think reliability might be a concern for the doctor, right? I don't know, if I'm at home, if it was something that I just had to wrap around my arm or something, I might be able to argue, but I'm not a medical person, right? Like taking a blood pressure is not something I know how to do. Even though it looks relatively simple, I know there's more to it. Now, depending on how this device works, I might not need to have any kind of skill to take my own vitals. But, technology isn't always right or accurate, correct? And so, if I go to a doctor who's relatively old and he hates those blood pressure cuffs that you put on your wrist, and it takes your blood pressure, he thinks they're the worst. They're not accurate, he says. There's nothing as accurate as a good old fashioned, whatever you call those blood pressure cuffs that you have to pump, But he's older, so perhaps, a younger doctor might not think anything of that technology that, is widely used now. Incentives for, it does take time for the doctor to have an appointment with the patient, right? Now, as far as, yes?
What about if a young doctor has like an older patient?
Yes, the older patient might not like that, right? Yeah. And a lot of older people are kind of set in their ways. And they don't really, they don't love this technology like you guys love this technology, right? They don't look at it as making their lives easier. It actually makes their lives more difficult. Why? Mainly because they don't understand it, right? Or they don't have practice with it. And they've been doing something one way for 70 years, right? It's worked for 70 years. Why would I change it now, right? So they don't see it as making their life more efficient. That's a great point. Okay, anything else you guys want to add to that? As far as cost, you probably have a cost associated with the gadget and the actual use of the gadget, but who knows would that be equivalent to an office visit? Some people would argue that it's not because you're not physically seeing the person, right, and observing them. And what about misdiagnoses from the information that's provided? That could open up lawsuits too, right? So a lot of things to consider.
And we brought up earlier about med school and how much that costs.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like on the receiving end, it's kind of really sucks when you have like a $20, $30 copay just to get your vitals.
Sure.
But that's money that they're not going to be able to get.
Okay.
And that, I think, decreases the incentive of being a doctor.
And it probably could, absolutely. So it ties into what we talked about before as well. Very good. Anyone else want to add anything to that? All right, so this group up here, I gave them a question that wasn't in the book. Everybody knows who LeBron James is, right? Okay. So my question to them was, should LeBron James have gone to college? Google it sometimes, by the way, see what you get. Should LeBron James have gone to college? There's lots of good videos out there on it. And you're like, what does this have to do with? It does have to do with economics. It actually has to do with business and economics. So what do you guys come up with?
Well, we kind of said that the incentives for going to college weren't as great as the ones to not go to college. And because he didn't go to college, he went right into the NBA. He apparently made $4 million for his first year. So he made a lot of money playing. He also makes a lot of money in sponsorships, and he also can create his own business if he wants in the future. And even though he may not have the education to run his own business, he's such a famous person that he can get people to come help him run his businesses.
Excellent,
And it
yes.
also made him pretty famous to go from not being in the NBA to just going right in the NBA. It like made a name for himself.
That's excellent.
The only incentives he thought about for going to college was that he made him a better basketball player. Because he had played in the NCAA and gone to the NBA, and he may have had a better understanding of how to use his money wise. So he, in just in case blew out his money when.
Yeah, I absolutely understand
Had a
that.
better
He was young, he was
understanding.
18 years old, right.
But there was a risk that he could have gotten hurt in college. So his career could have been, it could have been
Yeah.
over.
Excellent, all excellent. That was perfect. What was his main incentive though for going to the NBA? Right out of high school, money. Absolutely, right? Absolutely. He was poor, wasn't he? He was when he was growing up. He and his mom were poor, so that was his main incentive. But if you Google that, there are many interesting theories about what would have happened had he played in the NCAA. Where would he have gone to college? Do you think? Ohio State, most likely. Okay, and looking at the course of action, how that would have changed the course of action for Ohio State. For professional basketball, because he probably wouldn't have had signed with the Cavaliers. So it's kind of an interesting thing, but business and economics all tied into a basketball player's decision to go pro, right out of high school. All right, thank you, very good. How about you guys? What was your question?
1.9.
1.9. Okay, so let's look at 1.9. Okay, so this one is a little different. This relates to Section 1. So McDonald's typically serves breakfast until only 10:30 a.m. on weekdays, and 11 a.m. on weekends. In 2015, the company began to experiment with serving breakfast all day at various locations in San Diego. This is true, this is not made up. So several owners of McDonald's restaurants, however, point out that offering breakfast 24 hours a day presents two logistical problems. Number one, burgers and other meats need to be cooked at a higher temperature than eggs, so it would be difficult for employees to set the grill at the right temperature for both foods. Good point, right? And two, scrambled eggs require employees to continually stir, while hamburgers do not require this attention. In addition, some customers might buy the cheaper breakfast rather than the more expensive lunch or dinner meals. If McDonald's made you responsible for making this decision, discuss how you would go about analyzing whether to serve breakfast all day. Would your decision have to be all or nothing? Either serve breakfast up to 10:30 a.m. or serve breakfast all day. Would you have to serve the entire breakfast menu all day? What do you guys come up with?
Okay, so
There's a lot of things to consider in this. There are.
So we looked at it and we said that, well, there's not too much incentive for the people at McDonald's to serve it all day.
Okay.
Because it seems like it negatively impacts the employees.
Okay.
Because they have more work to do. So the first thing we thought of is that if you wanted to order breakfast after that time, you would need to pay extra.
Okay.
Either that or they're making enough money as it is for just lunch and dinner as a whole, because McDonald's is a huge business.
Right.
So, and I've never heard of a McDonald's going out of business. So, I'd say that, well, if you want to get breakfast at like 5 p.m., go find a place that serves breakfast at that time.
Go to Denny's, right?
Yeah.
Get your breakfast there. Okay, anything else you guys want to add to it? Does anybody have any other comments?
I went to McDonald's over the summer.
Oh.
I saw it today. And it didn't really,
Sorry. See, I'm making you happy with
the food is fresh. So it doesn't.
You mean the breakfast food, so you kind of like make it and just let it sit?
Oh, warmed up already. And if it's yeah. And the
Behind the scenes,
the little
McDonald's right
egg
there,
packets, you put them in the microwave for 30 seconds. Yeah, and the scrambled eggs is this egg mixture they keep in the fridge and they just pour it on and it only takes 10 seconds. So I don't think.
So really, so they found a way to serve breakfast all day. just not the kind of breakfast that most of us probably
Yeah, the
want.
only thing that's fresh is the quarter pounders, nothing else we expect.
Okay.
Doesn't really.
So behind the scenes McDonald's. Anything else? Interesting. And perhaps there was like a person that said, a couple people that said, hey, I want to buy breakfast after or whatever, and made a big deal about it, and it made some kind of media showing, and then people get upset, and so McDonald's says, well, we'll do this, we want to make our customers happy. So, I don't know how you'd eat, and some eggs came out of that, slop. All right? How about you guys? What number did you have? 2.7. Okay, so 2.7 relates to one of those making the connections again. Let me get this over here. An article on ESPN.com. Here we go with sports again, but I like sports, so I'd like to use these. About declining attendance at college football games, noted that schools in the central time zone had particular problems with attendance at games that started at 11 a.m. The athletic director at the University of Illinois was quoted as saying, I'm a big fan of evening games. How would playing games in the late afternoon or evening rather than in the morning affect the opportunity cost of a student attending a game? So I like this question. It's kind of an easy question. What do you guys say?
He said some college students might want to university game.
Okay. Perfect. Yes.
Some college students might have practice on Saturday morning.
Ah. Okay.
Playing their games encourage students to possibly take a study break on Fridays or Saturdays.
Oh, I love that. A study break at night on a Friday or Saturday night. That's a good answer there, Phil. Yeah, excellent. What else? Anything else you can think of? I mean, what sounds more appealing to you, though? 11 o'clock game or a 7 o'clock p.m. game? Any game in general. I mean, to me personally, what did they do to the Penn State game? Time-wise, anybody know? It wasn't originally scheduled at night. Why'd they move it to night? Well, people want to tailgate, but there's a Pirate game too, right? So they don't want all that congestion because that keeps people away, right? If you know you could potentially have tickets to this big rivalry game, but the Pirates are playing at the same time and you're familiar with Pittsburgh, what might you say to yourself? I'm not even going to attempt to go to that game. I'll just sit in the comfort of my own home and watch it on TV where I, have all the amenities of watching a college football game on TV, right? But this is definitely something, attendance at games that are in the morning or early afternoon tend to be lower. And why does that upset the university? Because in most universities, you got to pay, right?
And if it's on a Friday, I mean, some people have class at 11 a.m.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know that many games would be at 11 a.m. I mean, now some of you field hockey, soccer games, sometimes those aren't at the greatest times of day where, you actually can expect high attendance because people are in class, right? But a lot of this has to do with the revenue producing side of it, right? And as a student, you might say, hey, like I was out late last night, 11 o'clock, there's no way I'm making an 11 o'clock game, My friend's on the team, but I'll find out how the game went after the game's over, right? All right, so let's go over here to you guys. What question did you have? 3.8. Okay. All right, so 3.8. The Making the Connection feature explains that there are both positive and normative elements to the debate over whether medical schools should charge tuition and whether hospitals should continue to pay residents who pursue primary care, but not residents who specialize. So this goes back to that brief topic we talked about earlier. What economic statistics would be most useful in evaluating the positive elements in this debate? Assume that these statistics, and we're talking about positive elements, we're talking about facts. So what statistics, assuming that these statistics are available or could be gathered, are they likely to resolve the normative issues in this debate, which are, what it might be? So what did you guys come up with?
We came up with the statistics being how many residents actually continue to become PCTs.
Okay.
And then how many residents specialize.
Okay. Is that the only thing you want to consider?
No. We also have the cost of pay for PCP schooling
Okay.
and how many years it takes.
Okay. So are you comparing that to the cost of your PCP education versus perhaps your plastic surgeon? Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Yeah. You would need to know that. What else? Go ahead.
And then the last part of it, we said that no, If there was a definite answer, then it would have been
Right.
solved.
Right, we would be having the debate, right? Absolutely. Very good. Anyone want to add anything to that? That's excellent. All right, so behind you guys, a group behind you, what question did you have? 2.6, right?
Yeah.
I remembered that one. Okay. So let's jump over here. So 2.6, consider an organization that exists to help the poor. The members of the organization are discussing alternative methods of aiding the poor. When a proponent of one particular method asserts, if even one poor person is helped with this method, then all our time and money would have been worth it. If you were a member of this organization, how would you apply to this assertion? You got to think like an economist, not as somebody who feels sorry and wants to help poor people.
Yeah, we said morally, like, we agree with that.
Okay.
You want to think you can agree with that, but
Mhm.
financially, you have to consider, like, how much money you're putting into this organization, how much time,
Yeah.
all these other factors. So and like the population you're doing it in,
Okay.
because if you're only one person, it's really not worth it financially.
Yeah, I understand, and I know you have trouble even saying those words because you think it makes you sound like a bad
Yeah,
person.
yeah.
Yeah, I get that. But we're talking about from an economic standpoint, right? A business standpoint. Whereas we've got trade-offs, right? And you're giving up opportunity costs. If you're considering those things, leaving the feelings and the emotions and the morality out of it, right?
Yeah.
Not a great decision. Right, okay, very good. And we got our group back there in the corner, last but not least. Would you guys, which question? 1.5. Okay, 1.5. All right, so the grading system plays an important role in student learning. In their book, Effective Grading, A Tool for Learning and Assessment in College, Barbara Walvord and Virginia Anderson state that grading infuses everything that happens in the classroom. They also argue that grading needs to be acknowledged and managed from the first moment that an instructor begins planning a class. All right, so how could the grading system a teacher uses affect the incentives of students to learn the course material? What do you guys say about that?
Like the different ways that teachers grade their assignments and stuff.
Okay,
So,
sure.
it's like homework is graded pretty high.
Exactly. So if you have incentive to do the assignment, you're going to do it. Right. Okay. What else? Any more for part A? Okay. Then B says, if teachers put too little weight in the grading scale on a certain part of the course, such as reading outside of the textbook, how might students respond? Yeah, how many of you actually have a class or a course where you are somehow tested on whether you've read the material? Because I don't assume you read it. So, I mean, not in this class anyway. Now, in the class I want you to read the material and give an assignment that I give you points to read. Same idea, right? If you have little incentive to complete the assignment or the requirement of the instructor, your incentive is points, right? I mean, why else would you participate in my candy trading thing other than you might have wanted some candy, but I gave you 10 points just for doing it, right? And lastly, teachers often wish that students came to class prepared, having read the upcoming material. How could a teacher design the grading system to motivate students to come to class prepared? I want to hear your answers on this one. I love this question. So what'd you come up with? Okay. Don't worry, I'm not going to start giving you little quizzes at the beginning of class. That's a great idea. A little quiz at the beginning of class. If I said, okay, read pages 5 through 10 for Thursday, I'm going to have a quiz on it at the beginning. Would you read? Most of you probably would. Some of you might not still read, but for the most part, the majority of you would still be more motivated to read, right? Any other ideas? Those are all excellent answers to those questions. Any other ideas on how a teacher might motivate you? Bring more candy? I don't know. Oh, extra credit. I hate extra credit. You know why I don't like extra credit? Because I give so many opportunities for you to earn easy points. So when a student comes to me and says, I'm not doing well, and I look at their homework and I see that they didn't come to class and they didn't do this easy homework assignment I gave them that was just participation points, then I say, well, why should I give you extra credit, right? Now you're just desperate. When you could have earned easy points the whole time. All right, before you guys go, I know you're dying to get out of here. It's lunch. I get it. It's this class, worst time of day. I have one of those assignments for you that's just easy points, right? So just to make sure that you understand the concepts, I think I mentioned at the beginning of class last week, the first day, that I use other resources than this textbook, because there are a lot of great resources out there. One of them is called Page One Economics. It's a newsletter. And this one in particular, it's really not that lengthy. Don't panic. You're like my son who picks a book to read for school based on the number of pages and the size of the font. Summer reading, well, which book is got the fewest pages and which book has the biggest words in it? Like there's, font size. That's why he picked his book this summer. Don't be scared by the font size. I don't have any control over it in this exercise, all right? So this is an article, an actual article that was in this newsletter, and I want you to read it, and I have a list of questions that I want you to answer. So when you come to class Thursday, I expect this paper to be filled in. Again, not looking, I don't want you writing paragraphs for each answer. I don't like to read that much. Just concise. Business writing is concise, meaning short and to the point, right? So just answer the question. Don't give me fluff. I don't like fluff. All right? This is easy points. But this is going to solidify the concepts of this chapter, and then we'll move on to chapter 2. I will make the PowerPoints for chapter 2 available in week 2 module. So take a look at those. You might want to print those out before you come to class. If you have any questions, let me know. Why can't we have it all? That's what this assignment is titled. That's probably why we're on this. I thought about it afterwards. Right, see you guys, have a good day.
No, yeah, that's why I was thinking that maybe I could write it in the computer and send it to
Yeah,
you.
you don't even have to do that. Don't worry about that. You can bring it with you next Tuesday.